Hi everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this webinar today. We hope that you all find it beneficial and can take some practical information. To start things off, I'm going to introduce our panel. First of all, I'm Donal O'Neill, I'm Marketing Manager for Clonwilliam Health, and I'll be your MC for today. With me on the webinar, I have Louise Murray, our Socrates Support Team Lead, Michael Burns, who's our Head of Practice Services, and finally Colin O'Connor, who is the Operations Director for Clonwilliam Group. In order to get the most out of the session, we're going to try and keep it as quick as possible, and we're going to try and allow for time to take questions at the end. But if you do have questions, please send them in using the question functionality on GoToWebinar, and we'll do our best to get through them all. So the agenda for today, this is your quick introduction. Then I'm going to hand it over to Louise, who's going to run through the data protection in Socrates itself. Michael is going to give us an overview of the encryption and further information on that. And then Colin is going to talk about the internal GDPR activities and preparations that we've gone through for Clonwilliam Group. We're going to take a couple of questions after each section, and we'll finish up with a Q&A session. And as I said, we'll do our best to get through all of your questions, but if any aren't answered, please feel free to email gdpr@clonwilliamgroup.com, and we'll get through your questions as quickly as we can. So without further ado, I am going to pass it over to Louise, who is going to run you through the actual functionality of the product.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm just going to pick the screen here 1 second. Okay, hello. So first thing I'll do is I'll just go through the slides here. So the first thing is there's a few different things added into Socrates for this. And the first thing is the Socrates logon. When you reset your password window on logon, you'll receive a prompt if the password you choose does not meet the requirements. So the requirements now is going to be, it has to be at least 12 characters long. It needs to contain 1 uppercase, 1 numerical character, and 1 special case character. So when you update your password from within Socrates, you will receive a prompt if the password you choose does not meet the requirements. So it'll alert you to say, make sure that it's these specific things that you need. If you enter in an incorrect password more than 5 times, your user account will be locked, and you'll need to log into the Socrates Server Manager to get it unlocked. So on the next slide here. So yeah, within the Socrates Server Manager, as I was saying, if you entered in your password in Socrates incorrectly 5 times, you'll need to open up this program to unlock it, basically. And from there, then, say if someone, the reason why they might have unlocked it is because they've been putting in the password wrong, or they don't actually know what it is. So then the password can be reset from there. So access to the server manager has now been can now be restricted. It's not turned on by default, but it is an option that you can turn on. So I'll turn that on, and I'll show you how it works. Yeah, so when you're creating a user from the Socrates Server Manager as well, if you're filling in the password, once again, it needs to be 12 characters long, etc. And yeah, so that will it'll alert you to say that you're doing it wrong. So then the other thing I'll show you is the patient export. So from there, if a patient needs a copy of their medical data, there's a new section under patient maintenance now called patient export. So it creates one big file, which includes your medical legal report, your patient documents, letters, and e-referrals. So what you used to have to do was you would have to go into the patient's chart, get their letters, get their scans, then run medical legal report, whereas now it's just one big report that you can use. So the first thing I'll show you here, so that's pretty much the slides there. What I'll do is I'll just show you what happens when you log in here too many times incorrectly. So just logging in here now. So I'll just keep putting in the wrong password. So that's 3. And then after the 3 attempts, it's like the normal way that you would see it. It says you have to relaunch it. So we just relaunch it again. And oh, I'm sorry, I'm after putting it in correctly. That was an automatic thing. I'm after doing it right. Sorry, I'll do that again.
It's force of habit, really, Louise, isn't it?
Yeah. You put in your password correct. It would happen a lot with locums that someone puts in the wrong password incorrectly a few times. All right, sorry, I have to do this again. Okay, I'll make sure I do it wrong this time. Okay, so now it says this account is locked. Contact the system administrator to unlock it. So a lot of the time, this program, the Socrates Server Manager, it's only installed on the machine that accesses the server. But what you can have is some practice managers might have it installed, or some of the doctors might have it installed on their machine. So if you don't have it, we can always get it installed on the practice manager's machine, and she can always go in and unlock them. So I can't log on anymore. So I have to go open up this Socrates Server Manager under an account that has privileges. So I go in under the user accounts. From in here, you have a list of all the active users. We have a lot in our Socrates one. So I go under my account. So Dr. Louise Murray, it says over here on the right hand side all the details about me. And then over here on the bottom right, it goes unlock. So I can unlock this from here now. And if I didn't actually know what my password is, I know I do know mine, so I don't need to reset it. But you can always go in here and reset it. And when you reset someone's password now, as I was saying, it needs to be 12 characters long and contain 1 capital letter, 1 number, and 1 special symbol. So I might just show you here, if I was to create a new user, so just going to say I'm a doctor and male. I need to fill myself in a medical council number. And down here at the bottom, you have the option of going reset password every 1 year. You can change that to 5 years, but we'll leave it at 1 year. And we fill in a username. And when you put in a password, if it's not the right amount of characters, etc., it's going to alert me to say down here, password must be a maximum of 12 characters, must contain at least 1 uppercase, 1 numerical character, and 1 special symbol. So this one up here is just telling me I've got that medical council number already in use. So if I put in a password here now that has, it's got a number in it now, it's going to tell me, it's giving me what I've missing now. So password must be a maximum of 12, I have it made to 12, and 1 special case character. So it knows that I've put in a number. And I put in numbers and special symbols here now, and now my user has been created. So yeah, so from here I'll show you the next thing I could show you is how to turn on the fact that anyone can access the Socrates Server Manager if they have a Socrates username and password. So I'll turn it on that you only certain people can access the Socrates Server Manager. So from in there, we have logged into the Socrates Server Manager. I go down to maintenance and go into options. So when I scroll down here, down near the bottom, there's all these settings that you never use half of them. But over here, we got service. So server access restriction. I'll tick this and I click the save button. So now when I go into the user accounts in here, I have an extra button up here called server account access. So currently the only person that has permission to access the Socrates Server Manager is the system administrator. And if you wanted to add certain people into the group, you just click on the green plus sign beside their name. If you don't want them to have access, you just click on the X up here and they'll leave the group. So yeah, so at the moment, the only people that can log on now is Sheila and the system administrator. So yeah, that's how you would do that basically. So that's pretty much the only thing I need to really show you in the Socrates Server Manager. If I just X out of this, I've unlocked myself so I can log back in again. So I will, that's logged in there now. So the other section I'll show you is how to reset your password when you're logged on. So I can reset my password in here. So to do that, I go into my control panel and then my profile up at the top right corner. So from there, I can change my password. So down here, I got change password, enter old password, confirm old password, enter new password, confirm new password. So change password, enter old password. I'll just put in the one that I used to log on, which has not got the bare minimum that I need for a password. So enter a new password. So I'm just going to put it in incorrectly. And save. And it's just telling me here that password must be 12 characters long, contain one uppercase and one special case. So it tells you here what else you've done that's not correct, that it needs to be. Writing too many passwords out here. And now my password has changed. The only other place where it will ask you to kind of change your password is after a certain period of time, your password expires. So when it asks you to reset your password, so you log into Socrates, you'd fill in your username and password. The next thing it will tell you is your password has expired, change it. So at that stage, you'd have a window coming up saying enter old password. So you fill in your password that you use just to log in. And then underneath that, it'll ask you to create new password. So the exact same thing will apply there. It'll come up with a message to tell you if you're not putting in 12 characters, a number, a special case, etc. Yeah, so you'll see it there as well. So one of the other sections that I'll show you that's new in this here is the patient export. So that's what I was on about earlier. So from here, on the left-hand side, you have patient maintenance. And then from there, you have patient export. So when I click on that, it asks me two things. What reference? That's the name of the patient. So I search for the patient. So if I just go test, go test Anthony. And then export directory. It's asking me where do I want to save this file. So I'm going to say I want to save it onto the desktop. I'll create a new folder here called export. Okay. So now it's going to save that file in there and it's going to export documents, letters, and e-referrals. So say if for some reason I don't want to export a letter, I could just untick export letter. If I don't want scans, untick whichever one you don't want basically. So I'm just going to click on run. And what it's doing here now is it's exporting all of those files into this export folder, and it's creating all the files and it's going to merge it into one big file. So when I just close this and go to the folder on the desktop here now called export. So from here, I have a folder called T. So the reason why there's a folder in there called T is because it's the name of this patient was called Anthony Test. So it created a folder called T. So if you have someone called Joe Blogs, it'll create a folder called B. etc. So then what you can do is you can, when you're finished with it, when you send it off, wherever you're sending it or giving it to the patient, you then delete the folder on the desktop. So there's just one other thing about that I wanted to show you is you don't want to have to keep going patient export and keep having to choose the directory where you want to save the actual documents to. So you can set the default location. So to do that in Socrates, you go up to the top left hand corner and you go Edit, Preferences. And then you go to Documents. And under Documents, down here at the bottom, it goes Patient Export Path. And you just choose where you want to put it. So I click on the button with the 3 dots. And I choose where I want to put it, whether you want to put it on your C drive, on your desktop, wherever it is into your documents. But I've just created a folder here called Export earlier, so I'll use that. So highlight that and go OK. So and then click OK there. And when I go patient export now, it'll just automatically always go into that export folder. Yeah, so that's pretty much that section. That's pretty much everything that is new in Socrates so far.
Thanks, Louise. We've had a couple of questions just come in from the audience, so we might just run through a couple of questions very quickly, and then we'll pass it over to Michael, and we'll do more questions at the end as well. First of all, are there any audit reports to see who is accessing a chart?
Yeah, that would be in under the report section. So there's a few different auditing reports. They've been there for a while, but people mightn't be using them. It's under reports, audit log. And then from there, you can run a report called consultations view between dates, create between dates, or edit between dates. So those are 3 of those. Then you've also got consultation summary based on audit dates. You got audit log, so what reports have been run and what was done with those reports. So like say you might run the patient details report or something like that. The patient merge history, user logon history, yeah, those are just other auditing reports. There's kind of a side kind of note on that question is under the medical legal report, there's an option now that if you wanted to find out like what reports a patient was returned on, it would be in here. So Anthony test, and then you have the option of going include audit information. When you say OK to that, this is kind of new, this part. So down at the bottom of the screen, it tells you everything that was done on this. So for example, these were all viewed, all these reports. This is the medical legal one, so export. So for example, we ran that was for the patient export. So yeah, there's audits on that as well.
Okay, that's great. And then another one here, if I send emails from Socrates, will they be protected under GDPR?
Yeah, so if you're emailing off your patient details to somewhere, you have to use HealthMail now. You can't like, I don't know, fax it or send it off under your own email address. It has to be with HealthMail. So HealthMail is a secure email address. So what you would do there is a lot of people would log on to their website, HealthMail, and log in that way. But it's kind of an easier thing would be if you have Outlook set up on your machine, you can, yeah, if you have Outlook set up on your machine, you can get HealthMail linked into that as well. So say if you have I don't know, a letter that you need to email off somewhere else, you can go into the patient's chart. I can't really do it here because I haven't got any. So if I go under documents, if I highlight that, I'll go email and it will open up my health mail, and then I can email off that instead of having to go open up the website, attach it in that way. So that would be the secure way of sending it off.
That's brilliant. I'm just conscious of time here. So if you want to pass it over to Michael, and Michael's going to talk about the encryption services now.
Perfect. Okay, I'll just pass that on.
Thanks, Liz.
Michael.
Morning, everyone. So as part of the actual Sentinel package, we are offering as part of that the option for DESlock encryption. So just want to go through exactly what that is, how it's provided, how we're going to roll it out, and just a few things to be mindful of. So DESlock itself, it's a Windows data encryption utility that's capable of encrypting entire disks. It's used as a method called for full disk encryption. Essentially, it's encryption at rest. What that means is that the data is encrypted prior to booting up into the operating system. Before it boots up, you're prompted to put in a username and password. Once you enter that, then the data becomes unencrypted and you can continue on with your work. The main reason for deploying this will be to mitigate against the theft or loss of the server, the PC, or the laptop, the device itself. Is to provide you with security around that. In terms of the implementation, so internally, we've conducted a large number of tests on it and how we'll work with our applications if we were to deploy it on servers. And we did come up with a couple of issues. So as a result of that, we've taken a slightly different avenue in how we're going to deploy it. So what we're going to do is to take a drive and partition that drive into two drives. So we're not going to encrypt the full C drive. We're going to take the sensitive practice management data off, if it's on the C drive, off that, move that into a separate partition drive, and then use full disk encryption on that partition drive. This mitigates against some of the stuff that we came up against testing, where there could be issues with, other third-party applications that reside on the server. DESlock itself, it's a remotely managed service. It's got an enterprise server software that allows us to manage the rollout of it centrally, manage the workstation servers that are encrypted. There is a significant overhead involved in the encryption process on our testing to date. We've seen the encryption take anywhere from 2 hours to 2 days, and that's entirely based on, the size of the drive that you're encrypting, the specs of the actual drive, the machine itself, the server, or the PC or laptop. It does, as I say, allow for remote management, for us to be able to remote manage those particular devices. There will be, as I said, with the overhead, there could be a requirement of us to roll this out over potentially over a weekend due to the nature of some of it. So as part of your Sentinel package, you will have the option of one encryption license available to encrypt a server or a laptop. We've had a few queries from customers already asking, what's best practice in terms of the encryption. And there are certain scenarios where maybe you might decide that, okay, I have a rack-mounted server that is in a secure rack. It's physically bolted down to the rack, and it's got a padlock on it. And you may decide that, okay, that's secure enough, and that'll meet my requirements. And you could use that particular license to maybe encrypt a laptop that you have, which is probably easier to be lost or mislaid, and could potentially also have some sensitive information on it. So to avail of it, so our team has already begun the deployment of the encryption service. We're contacting all customers directly to organize the deployment of it on a site-by-site basis. We have noticed that there are specific requirements for the encryption service in terms of specifications of hardware that it won't run on. But we are conducting pre-deployment checks, and we'll be checking all of this before installing it. There are also a number of prerequisites that will need to be done before we can proceed. For example, it requires all Windows to be fully patched and up to date. But if you have hardware, support with us, we will provide those checks and update those patches for you. Again, it just adds time to the actual deployment of it. When the software itself is installed, you will see like a little icon on your taskbar down the bottom right-hand corner. obviously, if it's on the server, you may not be accessing server too often, but if it's on a laptop, you'll see that visibly there. Once that is installed, which we will do remotely, we can actually then choose a time of encrypting it ourselves. So let's say we could install the application itself on a Monday morning, but maybe wait, depending on the size of the drive, which we will determine, prior to rolling it out. It may be a case that we say, okay, this particular practice has, a terabyte of data. It's going to take it a minimum of a day to encrypt, and we would potentially then run that over a weekend. As I said, it's a site-by-site deployment that we'll have to do. It'll be different for each particular customer. Eset have said that it can be run, and we have checked this. It does run fine while the particular device is in operation. But obviously, with servers, we are a little bit wary of running that during normal business hours. With a laptop, it is probably it is not as essential that so we probably could run it on a laptop during normal hours. So just a few things that we've come up against in terms of when it is deployed. So the most important thing, and I can't emphasize this enough, is that when it's deployed, you are presented with a screen to enter a username and password. And this username and password will be needed anytime the device is booted up, is needed to be booted up. So let's say in the case of a server, if you have a Windows update that runs and restarts the machine, or you've power cut, as soon as that boots up, before it boots into Windows, you will need that username and password to allow it go any further. So it's really, really important that that's stored in a secure place, but that it's an accessible location, and that there are designated people within your practice that knows that and can get it when needed. As I said, the actual time it can take to encrypt it can be anywhere from 2 hours to 2 days, and that's something that we will gauge with each individual site. We will contact each and every one of you one by one to gauge that. So that's something that we can take care of prior to the actual encryption itself. One important thing as well is that I know many of you, if you're deciding to encrypt the servers, that many of the servers do not have a keyboard or monitor. So that's something that will be essential for the deployment of it. Obviously, when it boots up, you will need to enter in that username and password, and you previously might have been able to do it over like a remote desktop connection. That's no longer available because the data is encrypted until that username and password is entered. So you will need to be physically at that device to be able to enter that username and password. The other thing is, as I said, we've begun to roll out. It will take some time for us to reach everybody, just due to the nature of the encryption itself.
That's great, Michael. Thanks a million. Again, I'm just really conscious of time, so I'm actually going to skip past questions on your section, and we'll come back to them at the end. If you want to pass it on to Colin now, and we'll run through Colin's section quickly, and then try and give as much time as we possibly can for questions at the end.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay, is my screen up there now?
It is indeed.
Okay,
yeah.
So I'm just going to discuss what we've been doing as a business to protect our data for our customers. So about 2 years ago, we started a gap analysis on where we weren't with data protection as of then, based on the old rules, and to facilitate our our gaps in the new legislation. So we employed some consultants to come in, analyze our business, look at what we've been doing with our data internally, how we deploy it, how we manage it, whether it's in data centers or on site and so on. So that meant reviewing all of our policies and implementing new controls and protocols. As part of that, we rolled out staff awareness, which is an ongoing program. Every quarter, we release new awareness and training modules on GDPR. And they might involve anything from what is a data breach, how we record our information internally, where it's kept, being mindful of what we actually store, and not to overstore information that's not needed. And that might come from even emails from customers. Maybe too much information might be in certain emails, and we might delete that and remind the customer that we didn't need certain sensitive information to facilitate a case. So the awareness programs have worked quite well, and our staff now are quite aware of what they should do if there's a data subject access request, minimizing the amount of information they take and ensuring that it's always on secure equipment. As part of that process as well, we need to work with our data processes as well that are involved in our services, and that might be anything from Log Me In, Keep It Safe, and other facilities that would be used as part of our service. And when we were looking at these data processors, we'd also look at what kind of risk assessments they have done, what kind of backups they have in place to facilitate the services that we are providing to the customer. So right now we've implemented a GDPR management system, and that contains all of our risks that we review regularly. If anything ever happens, it goes in there. So all our policies are up there, our staff awareness, and as acting DPO at the moment for the business, I detail all of our information there for our GDPR requirements. So as part of our procedures, we had to look at how we keep our data, and we have regular data destruction procedures in place where A4 pads are shredded, hard drives that are brought back inside are shredded, destroyed, but they're certified to ensure that if we're ever moving hardware from sites, that it's taken care of, and that there would be no leak of any information that could still reside on it. Just as Michael had discussed earlier with the DESlock, we've actually deployed DESlock company-wide on our laptops, PCs, and servers to protect them. So that provides full data encryption and also features to remotely wipe the machines or laptops if they were ever stolen. To facilitate our ongoing needs for GDPR, we've hired a full-time DPO who's going to manage our compliance for our business units, and he starts actually just in 2 weeks' time. So in his role would be to ensure that we maintain our compliance, that audits are done, that we can facilitate data subject access requests for our customers, and if the customers ever want to discuss the GDPR compliance procedures we have in place, that he can share some of that information with you. We've also looked at how we market our services, and that's how we take information on our websites, our cookie policies, data collected on website traffic, and providing customers with opt-out on all newsletters and things like that, which are standard procedures for meeting GDPR requirements. And as I mentioned earlier, our processors, so our sub-processors that work with us, we have vendor supplier forms that they fill out, and we ensure that they have also the same controls in place or as good as ours, and that might include things like cyber liability insurance, just their own technical and security measures, and making sure that there's no data being transferred outside of the EEA. So that's what we've been doing as a business unit for the last 2 years. I'll pass it back to Donald.
That's great. Thanks, Michael. I'm just going to run through a couple of questions that have come in while everyone has been talking. So, Michael, there's been a fair few for you, starting off with, what do we do if we decide that we don't want to get the server encrypted?
I guess that's a decision for the customer themselves. Like, it's a license that's there for use. So as I said, if maybe they may already have a server encrypted, or they may already have a policy in place may have a rack-mounted server that is secure, they could use that particular license to encrypt, a laptop that maybe is moving about, that it's, doing site calls, that the doctor is bringing with him, moving from patients maybe. So they could use that license maybe to encrypt a laptop.
Perfect. And then running on, our IT person has advised that we don't need to have our server encrypted. Is this correct?
Yeah, I guess it's...
Sorry, actually, can I field that one? Just from a DPO perspective, okay? So if you've been given advice from your IT provider that you don't need encrypted, she will need to supply what is in place then to protect that data in the event that it's stolen or ransomware. The legal obligation of any GP pharmacy is that if their data is hacked with ransomware, which is very common these days, or if it's stolen, they'll need to inform the Data Protection Commissioner, okay? Then they'll need to inform them the risk of that data. So if there's 2,000 patients on that database that's been stolen or ransomware, each of those patients needs to be informed by letter that their data has been stolen, and that the risk is substantially high. I mean, so from a Data Protection Commissioner's audit investigation into that, they'll question why encryption was not in place. It's putting a bulletproof jacket around effectively the server. So if the IT provider states you don't need it, please ask them what security measures then are in place to protect in the event of a breach, because their legal obligation will be to inform the patients. If it's encrypted, then the risk to the patients is far, far less. The likelihood is they won't be able to see it, and they'll just have to wipe the data and maybe reuse the server as a blank server or whatever. But and in that case, the Data Protection Commissioner will likely inform you that you don't need to inform your patients because the risk of any exposure is very, very low.
Okay, thanks, Colin. And then finally, or sorry, not finally, but on this encryption, will there be any downtime involved for the practice to actually implement the encryption?
Yeah, during the rollout of it, there are a number of reboots in terms of, if we, let's say, need to deploy Windows patches when the application itself and the DESlock is installed, it needs a reboot. And then during the actual encryption itself, depending on the spec of the server or laptop, it may need to be done out of hours. But in terms of downtime, we will try and keep it to a minimum. As I said, we'll do it on a site-by-site basis in consultation with the practice. So we will try and keep it to a minimum.
Great, great. And we've had a couple of other questions around our right to be forgotten process. Michael, you might just talk through sort of how we're going to handle those requests where we want to actually permanently delete data.
Yeah, so we have a process in place internally where to facilitate these requests as they come in from our customers. So if a patient presents to the practice and requests for their data to be removed, we can facilitate that internally. When it hits our support desk, our team will present the customer with a form that they need to fill out, just stating in terms of maybe the patient ID and just the reasons, like the practice themselves need to satisfy that the reasons for removal of that they have met. They have, obviously GPs have their own legal obligations that they need to ensure that they're meeting. So let's say if I'm, a patient and I was in the practice 2 weeks ago, well, it may not be realistic or it's legally correct for that data to be removed, but that practice needs to ensure that they have, their responsibilities covered. Once that comes into us, then we will put that into practice. It'll be done on a request by request basis.
Okay, that's great. And then finally, one that I'm actually not sure of the answer to myself, but we may need to look at it and come back to it. But there's a question here saying we have a Gmail account, and would a surgery domain name be better for GDPR? I'm presuming that's around sort of the sending emails from Gmail. Anyone any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I suppose, look, if you have a surgery name, it still doesn't actually mean it's encrypted or that the information is within the EEA. You'd have to look at what exchange you are using. I think from like our recommendation would be to use HelpMail, because we know it's an encrypted email and it's hosted within Ireland. So certainly from day to day, if you're just emailing day to day things, general emails, then Gmail is fine. But anything patient related, ideally use something like HelpMail.
Great. Okay. And then one more question, and I think this just might be a bit of misperception about the encryption piece and how it works, Michael. So the question is the Socrates database not already encrypted and protected without this additional hardware product?
Sorry, I was on mute there.
No,
as far as, no, it's not. So there is no like database encryption at Socrates level, no.
Okay. Look, that's great. I'd like to thank everybody again for attending. If you have any further questions, and again, we weren't able to get through all of the questions that we received, but please feel free to email them to gdpr@clonwilliamgroup.com. That's gdpr@clonwilliamgroup.com, and we'll do our best to get back to you. Again, thanks everyone for joining us. This webinar has been recorded, so we will make it available to view after it. And thanks very much for your time. Cheers.
Okay, good luck.